Good morning, my second grade friends. So today we are going to still be working on some three-digit subtraction. I can never say that word. And we are going to be regrouping with zeros. So what I want you to do is think to yourselves first, how do you regroup when there are zeros in the numbers you start with? So we did this a little bit when we did two-digit subtraction, but this one is getting a little bit trickier because there are three digits, and sometimes it gets a little bit tricky. So let's try this example together first. So we're going to do what we've been doing all week. We're going to look at 504 and draw it into our chart. So I'm going to look at the ones place, my second grade friends, and I'm going to put 4 ones into our chart. I'm going to then look at the tens place, and there are no tens, so I don't have to actually draw anything over there. And then there are 500, so I'm going to go ahead and draw 500s. So what we do next is we look at that second number and we try and take away in our chart. So we'll look over here in the ones place first, and we have 4 and we have to take away 2. Let's go ahead and cross those out, and we have 2 ones left over. So next we move to the tens place. There are no tens in the tens place, and we have to take away 7. So what do we do when we need to borrow some? We go to the next store and we take 10 sticks and move them on over. Now, we don't have any 10, so if we add 10 sticks here, we then have 10 and not 0. So let's go over here and show our work. We couldn't take 0 away from 7, so we borrowed from the hundreds place, and then we made this a 10. So then we can do our subtraction. We had 10 and we take away 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That leaves us with 3 tens. And we have 400s and we take away 3, leaving us with 100, making the difference of this 134. So you saw how when we didn't have enough in the tens place, we simply called up the hundreds and asked to borrow 10, and he gave us them, and we were then able to subtract. So let's move on to another example. We have 301 minus 127. So first, let's look at that top number, 301, and draw it into our chart. We have 1, 1. We have 1, 1. We have 0 tens, so we won't put anything in the tens place, and we have 300s. So let's go ahead and draw that in. Then we'll look at that bottom number and see if we could take away. Oh, no. Well, my friends, look. We have 110 and we want to take away 7. So we call up next door, but the tens doesn't have anything in their place. So what do we think we have to do now? Let's go next door again and see if we could borrow, if the tens could borrow some, so then we could take away. So this is where it gets tricky. So we were in the ones place, right? And we wanted to take away 7, but we couldn't. So we call up the tens and asked to borrow 10 ones, and he couldn't do it because he didn't have them for us to borrow. So then we go over to the hundreds place and we ask to borrow 100 to turn it into tens. So let's do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So wait 1 second and let's show what we just did over here in our chart. So we wanted to borrow in the ones, but we couldn't, so we had to call up the hundreds place and borrow 10, and then this then became 10 instead of 0. So now what we're going to do is go back to that ones place and see if we could borrow from the tens now. So let's call over to that 10, and he has a 10 now that we could borrow, so let's bring that on over and draw it into our chart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now before we do anything, let's show that over here in our work. So we called up the tens now because he has 10, and we borrowed 1. We borrowed 10. So this becomes a 9, and this over here becomes an 11 because we had 10, and we can look over here in our chart. We had 1, and we added 10, making it 11 ones. So then we want to take away 7 ones. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that leaves us with 4 ones. Now we have 9 tens, and we want to take away 2. 1, 2. That leaves us with 7 tens, and then we had 200s left, and we took away 1, leaving us with 100. making the difference 174. So what I want you guys to see is that sometimes when we're in the ones place and we cannot borrow anything from the tens place, we actually have to jump again next door and borrow that way. So let's see if we could do that in another problem. We have 901 minus 576. So what do we do first? We look at that top number and let's draw it into our chart. We have 1, 1. We have 0 tens. We don't have to draw anything over there. And we have 9 hundreds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 hundreds. So then let's look at this bottom number and see if we could start subtracting. We'll look over here in our ones place, and we only have 1, and we want to take away 3. So let's call up next door. Oh no, next door doesn't have anything. Hey, tens, can you call next door and borrow 10 so we can borrow some? Of course. So the 10 borrows 10. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's show that in our work. So we borrowed from the 9, that became 8, and we made this a 10. So now we can carry on with our regular subtraction. Let's go back to the ones place. We have 1, we want to take away 3. Let's call up the 10. He has 10 now. Let's borrow those, bring them on over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now let's show that over here again in our work. So the tens place had 10. That now becomes a 9. And this becomes an 11. So now we have 11 ones over here, and we want to take away 3. 1, 2, 3. That leaves us with 8. And then we look over here in the tens place, and we had 9, and we want to take away 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That leaves us with 2. And then we had 800s, and we take away 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that leaves us with 300s. So let's try another example together. We have 405 minus 138. Let's look at that top number, and let's look in the ones place. We have 5 ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh no, we don't have any tens. And we have 4 hundreds. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, let's go back to the ones place. We have 5, and we want to take away 9. But we can't do that. So we're going to call the tens and ask to borrow 10. And then we realize he doesn't have any. The 10 says, you know what, I'll call the hundreds and borrow 10 from him. So then we take 10 tens from the 100 and move them on over to the tens place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And now let's show that in our work over here. So we borrowed 10 tens from the hundreds. That becomes 10. And then we can continue our regular subtraction. So we have 5 ones. Want to take away 9. Let's call up next door and borrow 10. That 5 then becomes a 15. And we are going to draw those over here. So we called up the 10. We borrowed 10. And then we're going to take away 9. Let's cross out 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Leaving us with 6. Then we have 9 tens, and we're going to take away 3. 1, 2, 3. That leaves us with 6. And we had 300s, and we take away 1, and we have 2, making the difference 266. Let's try another example together. This time we're not going to use the chart. We're just going to talk it out. So first things first, let's look in the ones place. We have 4 ones, and we want to take away 7. But we can't do that. So we're going to call up the tens and ask to borrow some. And then we realize the 10 doesn't have anything in its place, so he's got to call his friend and borrow 10. So then he calls the 100. The 100 gives him 10. So let's show that work right here. That's 0. If we have 0 and we add 10 to it, that becomes a 10. And then we are able to do the rest of our subtraction. So let's start again in that ones place. Look, ask the 10 to borrow some. That becomes a 9. And now we can put this as a 14. 14 minus 7, oh, that's a 7 plus 7 is a doubles factor of 14. We have 9 minus 8. So we're going to look at that number up here. 9 minus 8 gives us 1. And we have 4 minus 1, which gives us 3, making the difference 319. Let's try one more of these together. So let's do 405 minus 277. All right. So first steps first, let's look in the ones place. We have 5 ones. We can't take away 7, so we're going to call up our friend the tens. The tens can't lend us any because he doesn't have any, so he said, I'll call up the hundreds and ask if I could borrow them, so then you could borrow them. So he calls up the hundreds. The hundreds then gives us 10, so this becomes a 10. The 10 now has 10, so we're going to go back to the ones place and see if we can borrow from the tens place. This becomes a 9. This becomes a 15. Then we can start subtracting. So 15 minus 7 is 8. 9 minus 7 is 2. And 3 minus 2 is 1, making the difference 128. So our first step is to look in the ones place. If we need to regroup, call the tens. If the 10 doesn't have any, he has to borrow from the hundreds. And then we can carry on with our subtraction. All right, so let's try a word problem together. Jack has 175 more Beyblades than Carl. Jack has 309 Beyblades. How many Beyblades does Carl have? So it gave us the total amount of Beyblades that Jack has, which was 309. And we know that that's 175 more Beyblades than Carl. And we want to figure out how many Carl has. So, my second graders, what we're going to do is set up a subtraction problem. When we set up a subtraction problem, we know that the bigger number always goes on top. So let's put 309 minus 175 because we want to figure out how many Carl has. Let's start in the ones place. We have 9 minus 5. Can we do that? Of course. So let's do that. Now we're in the tens place and we have 0 and we want to take away 5. But we know we can't do that. So we're going to call up the hundreds. X to borrow 10. That becomes 10. 10 minus 7 is 3. And 2 minus 1 is 1. Making this answer that Carl has 134 Beyblades. All right. So today I'm going to ask you to do page 446 and 447, numbers 1 through 13. And because it's Friday and we made it through our first week of virtual learning, we're going to just do the odd numbers, which are numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13. Happy Friday, my friends, and I will see you next week. Let me know if you have any questions.